This house isn't yours. Get out before it's too late. No signature, no finesse, just a raw, ugly, unambiguous threat. The old fur floorboards creaked a mournful protest under my bare feet as I moved cautiously through the small space, every familiar shadow now seeming to lengthen, to twist, to harbor some unseen menace. This wasn't some random act of vandalism, not a bored teenager looking for kicks. This felt deeply personal. This felt like a message delivered with the subtlety of a brick through a window, or in this case, a jimmied window, and a scrawled threat. My stomach tightened. Who knew I was here? Who, besides the lawyer who handled Grandma's will, even knew this house was now mine? The answer, unfortunately, was as obvious as it was sickening. My mind, already reeling from the grief of Grandma June's passing just a week prior, flashed back with brutal clarity to another kind of eviction, another kind of soul-crushing note. 18 years old, the ink barely dry on my high school diploma, a piece of paper that felt more like a get-out-of-jail-free card than an achievement. I'd walked into what I thought was my home, only to find it stripped bare, an echoing, empty shell. My parents, Mr. and Mrs. David and Susan Henderson, or as I privately knew them, the meticulous architects of my childhood misery, and my golden boy older brother, Ethan, had vanished. 2 states away, the bewildered landlord had eventually told me, after I'd spent 3 days in that empty house, confused and increasingly terrified, eating the last of the cereal from a box left behind. Their parting gift to me, their lazy, ungrateful, good-for-nothing son, as my father so often called me, a single yellow post-it note stuck to the otherwise barren refrigerator door. Figure it out, Alex. Time to stand on your own 2 feet. No goodbye, no forwarding address, no explanation. Just a casual, callous severing, as if I were nothing more than a loose thread they'd finally snipped. Ethan, of course, the chosen one, had gone with them, his bright, unblemished future, a fully funded college education, a new car undoubtedly waiting, their unwavering adoration and bottomless financial support, all neatly packed and transported along with the rest of their lives. Me? I was the inconvenient truth, the excess baggage they'd finally, gleefully managed to ditch at the first legal opportunity. Grandma June, bless her eternally kind and patient soul, had been my only refuge in the desolate years that followed. She'd sent me what little money she could spare from her meager pension, tucked into letters filled with words of encouragement and a love so pure it sometimes made me weep. Her letters, often smelling faintly of lavender and the sea, were the only lifeline in an ocean of parental indifference and outright hostility. She'd always whispered to me during my childhood summer visits, her faded blue eyes clouded with a sadness, a knowing weariness I was too young and self-absorbed to fully understand back then. Be careful of family, Alex, my dear. Sometimes blood runs thicker with greed, with envy than it ever does with love. This old house, it's been my sanctuary. It might bring you peace one day, or it might bring you a whole heap of trouble. You remember that, now. Her words, once just the melancholic ramblings of an old woman, now echoed in the tense silence of her violated home with the chilling clarity of prophecy. The timing of this break-in, this crudely delivered threat, was too goddamn convenient to be a coincidence. It was almost as if my very presence here, claiming what was rightfully mine, had tripped some invisible wire. As if summoned by the lingering scent of stale fear and my own rising anger in Grandma's little kitchen, my phone, sitting Zaratka on the counter, vibrated sharply, then rang, the unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. I hesitated, a fresh wave of dread washing over me, before finally answering, my voice, a horse. Yeah? The saccharine, overly solicitous tone on the other end was instantly, sickeningly recognizable. Alex, darling, is that you? It's Mom. My mother, Susan. Her voice, usually reserved for public displays of maternal affection or private sessions of guilt-tripping, was now dialed up to an 11 on the fake concern meter. Oh, Alex, we heard through the grapevine about that dreadful break-in at June's house. Your father and I, and Ethan, of course, we were so terribly worried. Are you all right, dear? We're actually not too far away. Can you believe the coincidence? We were visiting some old friends up the coast. We thought we'd drive over, just to check on you, make sure you're safe. Not too far away? They hadn't been not too far away for my high school graduation, an event they'd conveniently forgotten about. They hadn't been not too far away for any of my birthdays for the past 10 years. Not even a card, let alone a call. For the 10 long, brutal years I'd spent busting my ass, working dead-end jobs, sleeping in my car some nights, slowly, painstakingly building a life from the ashes they'd so casually left me in, first with those odd jobs, then finally, with a sweat equity loan and a prayer, my own small but increasingly popular food truck business, Alex's Gourmet Grinds. But now that Grandma June was gone, and her house, her valuable prime coastal property house, the one asset they hadn't managed to bleed her dry of, was legally, unequivocally in my name. Suddenly, miraculously, they were not too far away. The lie was so blatant, so insulting to my intelligence, it almost made me laugh. Almost. An hour later, a time frame that suggested they'd been lurking somewhere very nearby indeed. Their late model sedan, a newer, more expensive model than anything they'd ever deigned to own when I was still an unwanted fixture under their roof, pulled up to the curb with a quiet, ostentatious purr. Out piled the Henderson clan in all their carefully curated glory. My mother, Susan, already dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a pristine, lace-edged tissue that seemed to materialize from nowhere. My father, David, his expression a carefully crafted mask of solemn paternal concern, though his shifty eyes were already casing the joint, no doubt assessing its market value. My brother Ethan, looking disgustingly smug and impeccably dressed in clothes that probably cost more than my monthly food truck revenue, every inch the golden child still. And Ethan's wife, Brittany, a woman whose personality was as sharp, pointed, and unpleasant as her 4-inch stiletto heels, already scanning Grandma June's small, lovingly kept cottage with an air of barely concealed disdain. Oh, Alex, my poor, poor boy. Mom launched herself at me before I could even fully open the screen door. A flurry of theatrical sobs and a cloud of cloying, expensive perfume that made me want to gag. This neighborhood clearly isn't safe for you. Living all alone in this rustic, isolated little place. We were beside ourselves with worry, weren't we, David? Dad nodded gravely, his hand automatically going to Ethan's shoulder in that familiar proprietary gesture that always excluded me. Your mother's right, son. This is no place for a single man to be rattling around in. Especially with things being as they are around here, apparently. His gaze flickered pointedly towards the splintered window frame I hadn't had a chance to board up yet. Ethan, ever the entitled prince, didn't even bother with the pretense of concern. He cut straight to the chase, a predatory smirk playing on his lips, Brittany clinging to his arm and mirroring his expression like a well-trained parrot. Look, Alex, let's just be real here, okay? This house, it's quaint, I guess, nostalgic, but you don't actually need it, do you? You've got your little food truck business, you're used to roughing it, living lean. Brittany and I, on the other hand, he paused for dramatic effect, then gestured vaguely towards Brittany's designer-clad, perfectly flat stomach. We're expecting again. Twins, can you believe it? A lie, I'd later discover, but effective at the moment. We desperately need more space, a real yard for the kids to play in. This place, with a bit of professional renovation, of course, could be absolutely perfect for us. My mother chimed in immediately, her voice dripping with a false sweetness that set my teeth on edge. Yes, darling, it's exactly what dear June would have wanted. For the family to be close, for her precious great-grandchildren to have a safe, loving home with a big yard. You can always come and visit, of course, Alex, and just think you wouldn't have to worry about the upkeep anymore, or dangerous intruders trying to break in. The sheer, unadulterated, breathtaking audacity of it stole what little air I had left in my lungs. They weren't even trying to be subtle. Not anymore. The break-in that morning, their coincidental arrival, this immediate, outrageous demand, it was a coordinated, full-frontal assault. So, let me just get this straight, I said, my voice dangerously calm, a carefully controlled monotone that barely contained the volcano of rage threatening to erupt inside me. The years of suppressed anger, of swallowed injustices, were suddenly very close to the surface. You kick me out of your house at 18 because there's no space for a lazy freeloader. For 10 long years, I don't hear a single goddamn word from any of you. No calls, no letters, not even a goddamn Christmas card. Grandma June, the only one of you who ever showed me an ounce of human decency, the only one who ever gave a damn whether I lived or died, leaves me her house, the only real home I've ever known in my entire miserable life. And now, not even a full week after her funeral, you all just waltz in here right after a convenient break-in and demand, not ask, but demand, that I just hand it over to Ethan? Is that about the size of it? Am I missing any of the finer points? My father's carefully constructed mask of paternal concern slipped, revealing the familiar hard-edged impatience beneath. Don't take that disrespectful tone with us, Alex. We're your family. We are simply trying to find a practical solution that benefits everyone involved. Ethan has a growing family. He needs this house more than you do. It's about what's practical, what makes sense. Practical? I nearly choked on the word, a harsh, incredulous laugh escaping me. Practical for whom, Dad? For Ethan, who's never had to lift a finger or work for a damn thing in his entire pampered life because you two handed him everything on a goddamn silver platter. Or is it more practical for you? Because you don't want to deal with him and his ever-expanding brood of prize-winning children under your own roof anymore. Brittany gasped, a sound like air escaping a punctured tire, her hand flying to her chest in a gesture of mock outrage. How dare you speak to your father like that? Ethan works very, very hard. Oh, really? Doing what, Brittany? I shot back, my patience wearing dangerously thin. Managing the allowance Mom and Dad still give him? Or is it still that cushy consulting job where his only actual client is Dad's golfing buddy, the one who keeps investing in Ethan's brilliant but consistently failing business ideas? Ethan's face, usually so smug, flushed a dull, angry red. You have no idea what you're talking about, you pathetic, grease-stained food truck cook, he snarled, his voice laced with the old familiar contempt. Enough! My mother shrieked, her voice suddenly losing all its gentle, sorrowful tremor and gaining a sharp, shrewish edge that I remembered all too well from my childhood. Alex, you are being deliberately difficult and incredibly selfish. This is a perfectly reasonable, generous request. We are trying to help you by taking this considerable burden of a property off your hands. A burden? I laughed again, the sound harsh and bitter in the suddenly silent room. This house, this burden, is the only decent, unconditional thing anyone in this goddamn family has ever given me. And you honestly think I'm just gonna let you waltz in here, wave your magic entitlement wand, and take it for King Ethan I? You're all certifiably, dangerously insane. My father stepped forward then, his eyes narrowed to slits, his voice a low, menacing growl. You should choose your next words very carefully, Alex. You wouldn't want to make things unnecessarily difficult for yourself. There are things about this house, about June's final affairs, that you clearly don't understand. Things that could become extremely problematic for you if you're not cooperative. A veiled threat, as blatant and ugly as the note on my kitchen table. Just like Grandma June's whispered warning from years ago, the chill that had settled in my gut earlier intensified, spreading through my limbs. As they finally reluctantly began to pile back into their sedan, their faces tight masks of resentment and thwarted greed, my mother, ever the master of the parting shot, delivered her ultimatum. "You have 1 week to reconsider, Alex," she said, her voice now cold and hard, all pretense of maternal affection gone. "1 week to come to your senses and do the right thing for your brother, for your family. Don't make us take further steps. Further steps." The words hung in the oppressive air like a toxic fog, a promise of more ugliness to come. I watched them drive away, the quiet purr of their expensive car, a final insult, a knot of cold anger and a growing pervasive sense of unease tightening in my chest. After their car disappeared around the bend, I went back inside, the silence of Grandma's house now feeling less like peace and more like the calm before a particularly violent storm. I meticulously searched the small cottage again. The break-in had been too clean, too precise, too purposeful. They hadn't been after her television or the few pieces of antique silver she owned. They'd been looking for something specific. My eyes fell again on Grandma June's old, scarred, roll-top desk in the corner of the sun-drenched living room. That one small upper drawer, the one I hadn't even really noticed before amongst the clutter of her life, was still slightly ajar, the wood around its tiny, old-fashioned brass lock splintered and chewed, as if someone had tried, and failed, to pry it open in a hurry. My heart pounded against my ribs with a new urgency. What the hell had they been looking for? And what in God's name were the further steps they were planning to take to get it, and this house, from me? Grandma June's little house by the sea, once a cherished symbol of her unconditional love and my only peaceful refuge, suddenly felt like the heavily contested center of a gathering, dangerous storm. My food truck business, Alex's gourmet grinds, my sole source of income and the one damn thing in my life I'd built entirely on my own, with my own sweat and blood and maxed out credit cards, also started experiencing a string of unfortunate coincidences that felt anything but. A vital compressor in my prep kitchen's refrigerator would mysteriously malfunction right before a massive catering gig I'd landed for a local festival, forcing me to scramble and lose half my perishable stock. A bulk order of fresh, locally sourced produce, the kind I prided myself on, would arrive inexplicably spoiled, smelling vaguely of some chemical cleaner. Anonymous, scathing one-star online reviews, clearly fabricated and filled with ludicrous, easily disproven accusations, would suddenly appear on every platform imaginable, attacking everything from my food quality and portion sizes to my personal hygiene and the cleanliness of my truck. I couldn't prove it was them, not yet, not with concrete evidence a court would accept, but the timing was too precise, the malice too familiar, too targeted. They were trying to squeeze me from all sides, to undermine my financial stability, to make my life so utterly unbearable that handing over Grandma June's little coastal sanctuary would seem like the only viable path to peace. But I knew, with a certainty bone deep and hard won from years of their particular brand of love, that peace with them was an illusion, a dangerous mirage. Their peace always came at my expense. Their family unity was just another term for my complete and utter capitulation. I wasn't going to roll over and play dead. Not this time. Not for Grandma June's house. She had believed in me when no one else had left me this one tangible, precious piece of her unwavering love, and I'd be damned if I'd let those vultures snatch it away with their lies and their threats. My first call, after a sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling and replaying their smug, entitled faces in my mind, was to Mr. Peterson. He was a retired police detective, a man built like an old oak tree, gruff and no-nonsense on the surface, but with a keen eye for bullshit and an even keener understanding of the subtle, often dark, undercurrents of their small coastal town. He had been Grandma June's neighbor and closest, most trusted friend for over 30 years. He'd always been genuinely kind to me during my childhood summer visits, a gruff but welcome respite from the constant criticism and casual cruelty of my own parents. He listened to my story patiently, his weathered face etched with the lines of 1,000 solved cases and 1,000 seen sorrows, growing grimmer with each detail I recounted. "Your grandmother, Alex," he said when I'd finally finished, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that nevertheless carried the weight of authority, was a sharp woman, one of the sharpest I've ever known. "She loved you dearly, son, more than words can say, but she wasn't naive, not by a long shot. She mentioned to me a few times in her later years, especially after your grandfather passed, that she was concerned about certain pressures from your parents, David and Susan, regarding her finances. She never went into specifics, kept her family business private, as was her way. But she hinted more than once that they were trying to get her to invest in some of Ethan's so-called ventures. Ventures that, from what little she let slip, always seemed to go belly up rather spectacularly, leaving your folks holding the bag and, I suspect, looking for a new source of funds to bail out their golden boy yet again." His words confirmed my growing, sickening suspicion. That splintered drawer on Grandma's desk, the strange, out-of-place financial-looking papers I'd found tucked away in an old recipe box after their visit. They were all pieces of a larger, uglier, and increasingly complicated puzzle. My next call was to a young, hungry, and reportedly tenacious lawyer Ava had recommended from her extensive LA network, a woman named Sarah Chen. Sarah, according to Ava, specialized in contentious estate disputes and had a well-earned reputation for being an absolute bulldog in the courtroom, someone who didn't back down from bullies or tolerate procedural nonsense. After hearing my story over a secure video call, including the details of the initial break-in, the family ambush, their demands, the ongoing harassment, and my suspicions about a potentially fraudulent or coerced updated will they might try to produce, Sarah was more than intrigued. She was visibly incensed. The timing of their demand, Alex, coupled with the initial break-in and the subsequent pattern of harassment, is highly suspicious, to say the least, she said, her voice crisp, professional, and carrying an undercurrent of steely resolve that I found immensely reassuring. If your grandmother's original will, the one you were aware of, clearly states you as the sole beneficiary of the house, they have a very weak legal standing. Their only recourse would be to produce a more recent, legally sound codicil or an entirely new will. And even then, she continued, a sharp glint in her eye, if there's any evidence that your grandmother was under duress, lacked mental capacity, or was unduly influenced when such a document was purportedly signed, it can be and will be vigorously contested. We need to find out exactly what they think they have on you or on the estate, and why they're so desperate for that specific house. The further steps my mother had so ominously threatened became clearer a few days later when a smarmy, over-tanned local lawyer I didn't recognize, a Mr. Davies, contacted me via registered mail. He was, the letter stated, acting on behalf of the Henderson family. He informed me, in a tone dripping with oleaginous false sympathy, that an updated and legally binding addendum to Grandma June's will had recently been discovered amongst her personal effects. This miraculous addendum, he claimed, stipulated that while the house was indeed bequeathed to me, it was with the express understanding and legally enforceable condition that it be made available for the immediate and indefinite use of any direct family member found to be in dire need of suitable housing, a clause so breathtakingly vague and open to ludicrous interpretation, it was clearly, unequivocally designed to give Ethan and his brood carte blanche to squat there indefinitely. Davies, in his letter, magnanimously suggested a friendly, informal family meeting at his office to discuss the smoothest and most amicable way to honor dear June's final wishes, which I knew was just polite, lawyerly code for how quickly can you sign these papers and hand over the goddamn keys to Ethan without making a fuss. Sarah Chen, when I forwarded her the letter, immediately identified it as a poorly veiled, amateurish legal trap. They're trying to get you to acknowledge the existence and potential validity of this addendum by even discussing it, Alex, she warned, her voice sharp with disapproval. Or, even better for them, to get you to agree to some kind of informal shared living arrangement on record, something they can later twist and use against you in probate court. Do not, under any circumstances, meet with them or this Davies character without me present, and don't sign anything from them. Not a damn thing. Not even a goddamn get-well-soon card if one of them conveniently comes down with a mysterious illness. The pressure, however, was relentless, a multi-pronged assault. Brittany, Ethan's charming spouse, somehow got hold of my personal cell number, a number I guarded closely and rarely gave out. She then proceeded to bombard me with tearful, manipulative texts, long, rambling screeds about how her innocent children deserved a stable, loving home with a yard, how my selfish actions were tearing this family apart at the seams, and the classic guilt trip, how Grandma June would be so deeply disappointed in my callous behavior. It was a masterclass in emotional blackmail and gaslighting, each message more cloying and guilt-inducing than the last. Ethan, meanwhile, apparently preferred a more public form of humiliation. He accidentally bumped into me at my usual wholesale restaurant supplier one morning, making a loud, theatrical scene in front of several other chefs and business owners about how I was letting a perfectly good family home, a legacy, go to waste, while his poor, innocent children were practically living on top of each other in a tiny, cramped apartment. It was a clear, calculated attempt to damage my professional reputation within our small, tight-knit culinary community, to paint me as unreasonable, uncharitable, and cold-hearted to people I did regular business with. He wanted to make me a pariah, to isolate me until I had no choice but to cave to their demands. But Grandma June, bless her foresight and her quiet strength, it turned out, had been more prescient, more prepared for their avarice than I could ever have imagined. That small, seemingly insignificant keepsake she pressed into my hand years ago, during one of my last bittersweet visits, before my parents had uprooted us all and moved us far away from her comforting presence. A tarnished old silver locket, intricately carved with forget-me-nots, a locket she always wore close to her heart, held the key. I'd always kept it, tucked away in a drawer, a tangible link to the only source of unconditional love and acceptance I'd ever known in my life. Frustrated, angry, and feeling increasingly cornered after Ethan's stun at the supplier, I'd been idly fiddling with it that evening, turning it over and over in my fingers. The main clasp, old and worn from decades of use, suddenly, unexpectedly, gave way in a new spot, a tiny, almost invisible seam I'd never noticed before, revealing a minuscule, almost invisible secondary compartment hidden within the locket's casing. Inside, folded into a square so small it was a miracle it hadn't disintegrated into dust, was a thin, fragile strip of microfilm. It felt like something straight out of an old Cold War spy movie, not something my sweet, unassuming grandmother would possess. Mr. Peterson, with his decades of old police connections and favors owed, knew a guy, a retired forensics tech, who still had a working, albeit ancient, microfilm reader tucked away in his garage. What we found on that tiny strip of film was nothing short of a bombshell, an explosive revelation that changed everything. It was a meticulously kept, almost obsessive log in Grandma June's own distinctive, spidery handwriting, detailing years upon years of financial loans. Her quotation marks, not mine, to my parents, David and Susan, and to my brother Ethan. Loans that, according to her notes, were never, not once, repaid. More damningly, the microfilm included photocopies of hastily scrawled promissory notes they'd signed under pressure from her, and a heartbreaking series of increasingly desperate, pleading letters from Grandma, begging Ethan in particular, to stop pressuring her to invest her meager savings in his latest harebrained get-rich-quick schemes she clearly, wisely saw as foolish, ill-conceived, and likely fraudulent. There were also her private, dated notes detailing specific conversations where they had relentlessly tried to convince her, to bully her, to cajole her into changing her will in Ethan's favor, and her firm, unwavering refusals. And then, the absolute kicker, the final, irrefutable proof, a digitally scanned, crystal clear copy of her original, properly executed, and notarized will, explicitly leaving the coastal cottage and her modest savings entirely and solely to me, Alex Henderson, her grandson. This will was dated just 6 months before her death, and accompanying it, a handwritten addendum, penned in her shaky but determined hand, witnessed by both Mr. Peterson and another trusted lifelong friend, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Albright, as it turned out, stating unequivocally that any subsequent will or codicil produced after that date, particularly one naming any other Henderson as a primary beneficiary, should be considered null and void, having almost certainly been obtained under duress, undue influence, or outright deception. She had known, she had anticipated their boundless greed. She had, in her own quiet, resourceful way, tried to protect me, even from beyond the grave. Armed with this irrefutable, explosive evidence, Sarah Chen drafted a blistering, legally airtight cease and desist letter addressed to Mr. Davies, with copies sent directly to my parents and Ethan. The letter meticulously outlined our escalating campaign of harassment, referenced the damning evidence of their long-term financial exploitation of Grandma June, and stated in no uncertain, legally binding terms that any attempt to enforce the clearly fraudulent addendum or to further interfere in any way with my rightful inheritance of the property would be met with the full, unyielding force of the law. This included, Sarah pointedly noted, the pursuit of potential criminal charges for elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and uttering a forged document. We also, at Mr. Peterson's astute suggestion, included a subtle, carefully worded hint that we were now fully aware of Ethan's less than legal business ventures and the decidedly unsavory, potentially dangerous characters he might be involved with, a well-aimed shot across their bow, designed to let them know we understood the true, desperate source of their sudden, intense interest in Grandma's modest estate. The reaction from their camp was immediate, but not in the way I had naively hoped. Instead of backing down in the face of such overwhelming, damning evidence, they doubled down, lashing out in a new, even more insidious and frankly terrifying way. A few days after Miss Davies undoubtedly received our letter, I got a call. An official call from Adult Protective Services. An anonymous, but clearly not so anonymous complaint had been filed against me. It alleged in lurid, slanderous detail that I, Alex Henderson, had unduly influenced my frail, vulnerable grandmother in her final, declining months. That I had systematically isolated her from her loving, devoted family, them, naturally. That I had coerced her, through unspecified nefarious means, into changing her will to benefit myself exclusively. The complaint even, despicably, hinted at possible physical neglect on my part during my brief stays to care for her when her health began to fail. It was a vile, disgusting, and utterly baseless tactic, clearly orchestrated by my parents as a desperate, last-ditch effort to discredit me, to tie me up in a bureaucratic and emotionally draining nightmare, and to paint me as the villain of this sordid family drama. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me momentarily stunned. They were trying to weaponize the very system designed to protect the vulnerable, like Grandma June, against me, the true and lifelong victim of their relentless campaign of manipulation, neglect, and greed. The battle for Grandma June's little house by the sea, I realized with a grim, hardening resolve, wasn't just about a piece of property anymore. It was about truth. It was about justice. And it was about finally, definitively, and permanently ending their toxic, destructive reign over my life. And I was, after 10 long years of being their punching bag, more than ready to fight. The call from Adult Protective Services, that despicable, calculated low blow, hit me like a physical punch to the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. To have them twist my grief for Grandma June, her final act of love in leaving me her home, into a vile accusation of elder abuse and undue influence, it was a level of depravity that left me momentarily speechless, reeling from the sheer, unadulterated malice of it. But the shock, the initial wave of nauseating disbelief, quickly morphed into a cold, hard, diamond-edged rage. They weren't just trying to steal a house anymore, a physical structure of wood and nails. They were trying to steal my character, my integrity, to obliterate any shred of legitimacy I had, to poison the memory of the one person in my goddamn life who had ever shown me genuine, unconditional love. Sarah Chen, my lawyer, was predictably and righteously furious when I relayed the news, but her anger was tempered by a steely, pragmatic resolve. "This is a classic, if particularly loathsome, smear tactic, Alex," she said, her voice tight with controlled indignation over the phone. "They're desperate. They know our evidence regarding the will is irrefutable, so they're trying to bog you down in a collateral attack to discredit you as a person before any legal proceedings regarding the estate can gain significant traction. It's designed to drain your resources, your energy, and your will to fight." She paused, then her voice firmed. "We need to cooperate fully and transparently with APS. Provide them with every piece of evidence we have immediately by Grandma June's handwritten log from the microfilm, her properly witnessed original will, and her subsequent addendum, Mr. Peterson's sworn affidavit regarding her state of mind and her expressed fears about your parents. We need to demonstrate unequivocally that this is a baseless, retaliatory complaint born entirely from their frustrated greed and nothing more." The APS investigation, as Sarah had predicted, was stressful and invasive. It involved uncomfortable interviews, requests for financial records, and the gnawing anxiety of having my entire relationship with Grandma June scrutinized under a microscope of suspicion. But ultimately, their desperate gambit worked spectacularly in my favor. Mr. Peterson, with his decades of unimpeachable service as a police detective and his clear, unwavering affection for Grandma June, was a pillar of credibility. His testimony regarding her sharp mind, her fierce independence even in her declining health, and her explicit, documented fears about my parents' financial importuning was irrefutable. The evidence on the microfilm, particularly Grandma June's own poignant, handwritten words about the relentless pressure she was under from my parents to change her will, painted a crystal clear picture of who the real manipulators were. The APS investigator, a weary but discerning woman named Miss Albright, who had clearly seen her share of family dysfunction, quickly saw through their transparent charade. The case against me was closed within a couple of weeks, deemed unfounded, with a not-so-subtle, stern warning reportedly issued to my parents by Miss Albright herself about the serious legal repercussions of filing malicious and demonstrably false reports with a state agency. It was a small but significant victory, and it fueled my resolve like high-octane gasoline. They had, in their arrogance and desperation, monumentally overplayed their hand. Meanwhile, Mr. Peterson, with his old-school detective instincts now fully engaged and his sense of justice thoroughly outraged by my family's tactics, had been quietly, persistently digging deeper into Ethan's much-vaunted business ventures and the less-than-reputable characters Sarah had so pointedly alluded to in our cease and desist letter. What he eventually unearthed through a network of old informants and a careful sifting of online forums dedicated to high-risk investments was even more disturbing, more dangerous than I could have anticipated. Ethan, it turned out, wasn't just a spoiled, incompetent brat living off parental handouts and a string of predictably failed get-rich-quick schemes. He was, according to Mr. Peterson's increasingly alarming findings, deeply enmeshed in a local, high-risk, unregulated cryptocurrency speculation ring. This ring, run by individuals with very real, very unsavory criminal ties, including, it was rumored, Marcus Thorne himself, or at least some of his more aggressive lieutenants, had recently spectacularly collapsed, leaving a long trail of furious, out-of-pocket investors demanding their money back with interest and often with menaces. My father, David, in a desperate, foolhardy attempt to bail out his precious golden boy yet again, had apparently, and with an astonishing degree of stupidity, promised these dangerous individuals that a significant family inheritance was forthcoming, an inheritance they could all, he'd implied, benefit from if they just helped persuade the stubborn, uncooperative beneficiary, me, to be more forthcoming with the funds. The break-in at Grandma's house, the splintered drawer on her desk, they hadn't just been looking for a newer fraudulent will. They'd likely been frantically searching for any hidden assets, any stashed cash, any marketable antiques, anything at all they could use to appease Ethan's increasingly agitated and threatening creditors. And the thinly veiled threats I'd received from my father weren't just his usual bluster. They were likely amplified, perhaps even dictated, by these shadowy, violent figures lurking in the background, using my parents and Ethan as their desperate, terrified puppets. This wasn't just a grubby family dispute over a will anymore. I was caught squarely in the dangerous, unpredictable fallout of Ethan's reckless, illegal dealings. My life, I realized with a jolt of pure, cold fear, could actually be in danger. Armed with this new, terrifying information, Sarah Chen immediately advised a more aggressive, preemptive legal strategy. We filed an emergency petition in probate court to officially validate Grandma June's original will and her witnessed handwritten addendum, seeking an expedited hearing. Simultaneously, we filed for a comprehensive restraining order against my parents, Ethan and Brittany, citing their pattern of ongoing harassment, the attempted break-in at Grandma's house, their malicious and unfounded smear campaign with Adult Protective Services, and now, the clear and present danger posed to my safety by Ethan's documented criminal associations and the threats emanating from that quarter. The court date was set for the following week, My family, predictably, hired the same smarmy Mr. Davies to represent them. His first move was to file a counterpetition, a document riddled with falsehoods and outrageous accusations, claiming their updated addendum, the one they tried to bully Grandma into signing, was the true and sole reflection of June's wishes, and that I was the one exhibiting erratic, greedy, and mentally unstable behavior, possibly even a danger to myself and others. It was going to be a nasty, brutal fight, and I knew they would stop at nothing. The days leading up to the court hearing were a blur of intense legal preparations, sleepless nights filled with anxiety, and a constant gnawing, low-level fear that made every unexpected noise, every unfamiliar car on the street feel like a potential threat. Ava, bless her fiercely loyal heart, flew up from LA. Without a second thought when I told her the date, a much-needed pillar of sarcastic, unwavering, and occasionally profane support. Mr. Peterson, stoic and utterly reliable, helped us coordinate with the local police department, ensuring there was an official record of the threats and the potential danger I was facing, even arranging for a discreet police presence near my cottage. Chloe, my sister, remained a ghost. After her tearful, desperate confession in the park, she'd vanished again, her phone disconnected, no forwarding address. I didn't know if she was terrified into silence, if she'd been strong-armed back into the toxic family fold by her parents, or worse, if she was now actively working against me again under duress from Thorne's people. The uncertainty, the not knowing whether she was a victim or a viper, gnawed at me almost as much as the threats themselves. The courtroom on the day of the hearing was small, stuffy, and packed with a tension so thick you could practically chew on it. My parents sat ramrod straight at the opposing table with Ethan and Brittany, all four of them, attempting to project an aura of aggrieved, sorrowful innocence. Though the strain around their eyes and the tightness of their mouths betrayed their anxiety, Davies, their lawyer, was all smooth, reptilian confidence and oily, insincere charm. The hearing began with Davies presenting their case, or rather, their carefully constructed fiction. He painted a picture of Grandma June as a confused, easily manipulated elderly woman in her final failing days, tragically swayed by her scheming and opportunistic grandson, me, naturally, and how my parents and Ethan, her truly devoted and heartbroken family, were merely altruistically trying to uphold her true final wishes as expressed in their newly discovered, legally sound addendum. He even had the unmitigated audacity to suggest that my food truck business was failing and that I was a desperate gold digger, trying to leech off my sainted grandmother's estate. When it was Sarah Chen's turn to speak, she was a force of nature. Calmly, methodically, with the precision of a surgeon, she dismantled their entire narrative, piece by damning piece. She presented Grandma June's meticulously kept microfilm log, her increasingly desperate handwritten letters, the properly notarized original will, and the witnessed, legally sound addendum that explicitly voided any subsequent changes made under suspicious circumstances. She then called Mr. Peterson to the stand, his heartfelt, credible, and deeply moving testimony about June's sharp mind, her unwavering, fierce love for me, and her explicit, documented fears about my parents' relentless financial greed visibly moved the no-nonsense, experienced judge. Then Sarah dropped the bombshell. She introduced evidence of Ethan's deep involvement in the collapsed cryptocurrency speculation ring, complete with names, dates, and the dangerous, criminally connected individuals he now owed vast sums of money to. She powerfully, persuasively suggested that their family's sudden, desperate, and illegal attempts to get their hands on Grandma June's house were not about fulfilling some fabricated family need, but about staving off violent, potentially lethal retribution from Ethan's creditors. My father blanched, his face turning a pasty, unhealthy gray. Ethan looked like he was about to physically throw up all over Mr. Davies' expensive Italian shoes. Brittany's perfectly applied, mask-like makeup couldn't hide the brief, ugly sneer of pure panic that twisted her features. Davies tried to object, to bluster, to discredit, but Sarah was relentless, a shark that had scented blood. She coolly presented further evidence of their systematic harassment campaign, the official report from Adult Protective Services dismissing their malicious complaint, even printouts of some of Brittany's more venomous, thinly veiled social media posts. The judge, a stern, experienced woman in her late 50s, with eyes that had clearly seen every form of human depravity, listened intently, her expression growing increasingly grim and disapproving as the sordid, ugly details of my family's decades of behavior unfolded before her. The turning point, the moment that sealed their fate, however, came from a completely unexpected source. During a brief mid-morning recess, as I was trying to steel myself for the inevitable brutal cross-examination by Davies, a court bailiff approached Sarah Chen. "Counselor," he said quietly, "there's someone here who wishes to speak with you urgently regarding the Henderson case. She says her name is Chloe Carter. Henderson, I mean. She claims to be the petitioner's sister." My heart leaped into my throat, then seemed to stop altogether. Chloe, she was here. After all this silence, all this uncertainty, Ava, sitting beside me, squeezed my arm so hard I nearly yelped, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning hope. Sarah, ever the consummate professional, simply nodded and excused herself, disappearing into the corridor with the bailiff. When the hearing reconvened 15 minutes later, Sarah Chen had a new, unannounced witness. Chloe walked, slowly, hesitantly, to the stand, pale and trembling, her eyes fixed on the floor, deliberately avoiding the furious, incredulous, and suddenly terrified stares of our parents and Ethan. Her testimony when it came was quiet, almost whispered at first, but it was absolutely devastating. She corroborated everything on the microfilm, every detail of Grandma June's log. She admitted, her voice choked with tears, that our parents had systematically pressured Grandma June for money for years, that Ethan's endless ventures were a constant, crippling drain on their finances, and that she herself had been used as a reluctant, often unwilling pawn in their manipulative schemes since she was a child. She confessed, her voice breaking, that the updated addendum their lawyer, Mr. Davies, was so vehemently pushing was an utter fraud, a complete fabrication. She described in horrifying detail how she had seen our father David coaching our mother Susan on how to mimic Grandma June's increasingly shaky signature, and how they had pressured a new, ethically dubious notary, who turned out to be a distant, easily influenced cousin of Brittany's, to validate the fraudulent document after Grandma June was already too ill, too heavily medicated, to fully comprehend what she was supposedly signing, if she had even been conscious enough to sign it herself at all. She then detailed the terrifying threats from Marcus Thorne's associates, the true nature of her own skating accident that had been no accident but a brutal warning, and how our parents and Ethan had explicitly, repeatedly told her to lie to me, to manipulate me, to do whatever it took to get me to give them the house, or the money from its sale, to appease Thorne and save their own skins. She wept openly as she spoke, not the calculated crocodile tears of her previous performances, but the genuine, heartbreaking, soul-wrenching sobs of someone finally, agonizingly, unburdening themselves of an unbearable, crushing weight of guilt and fear. The courtroom was stunned into an absolute pin-drop silence. My parents and Ethan looked as if they'd been physically poleaxed, their faces masks of disbelief and dawning, abject horror. Brittany was staring at Chloe with a look of pure, unadulterated, murderous hatred. Davies, their once smug lawyer, was frantically shuffling his papers, his smooth, confident facade completely, irrevocably shattered, his face ashen. The judge's ruling, when it came after a brief deliberation, was swift, brutal, and decisive. She declared Grandma June's original will, the one leaving her house and modest savings entirely to me, Alex Henderson, as the sole valid and legally binding document. The Henderson family's so-called updated addendum was summarily thrown out, officially declared fraudulent. She granted my request for a permanent, comprehensive restraining order against David, Susan, Ethan, and Brittany Henderson, citing a clear, undeniable, and disturbing pattern of harassment, intimidation, and potential endangerment. Furthermore, and this was the blow that truly broke them, she formally referred the voluminous evidence of potential elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, uttering a forged document, and Ethan's deeply concerning connections to illegal financial schemes and organized crime to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation. As we left the courthouse, blinking in the sudden bright Oregon sunlight, I felt a profound weight, one I hadn't even fully realized I'd been carrying for most of my goddamn life, lift from my shoulders. It wasn't just about the house anymore. Not really. It was about the truth, the ugly, messy, painful truth, finally, blessedly coming to light. My parents and Ethan were immediately hemmed in at the courthouse lobby by a surprisingly aggressive scrum of local newspaper and television reporters, a development mister. Peterson, with a discreet smile, later admitted to having discreetly tipped off. Their faces, caught in the harsh glare of flashing cameras, were a grotesque mixture of shock, humiliation, and dawning, abject horror as pointed, accusatory questions were shouted at them from all sides. Brittany, ever the performer, immediately burst into a fresh torrent of loud theatrical tears, hysterically claiming she was the innocent victim in all of this sordid mess. Chloe stood apart from them, near the exit, looking small, fragile, and utterly exhausted, but also, for the very first time since I'd known her, a little bit free. I walked over to her. There were no easy words, no simple platitudes that could bridge the vast, desolate chasm of years and lies between us. "Thank you," I said simply, the words feeling inadequate but deeply sincere. She nodded, fresh tears still streaming down her pale face, but these felt different, cleansed somehow. "I'm so sorry, Alex," she whispered, her voice raspy, "for everything. For all of it. I should have done this years ago. I should have been stronger. You did it now, Chloe," I said, and I meant it. That's what matters. Our relationship, if we were ever to truly have one, would be a long, arduous, and complicated road filled with landmines of past hurts and betrayals. But for the very first time, there was a flicker, a tiny, hesitant spark of something that wasn't built on lies, deceit, and manipulation. There was at least a chance. Ava threw a supportive arm around my shoulders, her usual sarcastic grin softened by a genuine warmth. "Well, Chef Alex," she said, her voice filled with a fierce pride that made my own eyes sting a little. "Looks like you got your house, and a hell of a lot more besides. Now, what do you say we go find the best damn Dungeness crab in this entire godforsaken town? My treat. You've more than earned it." As we walked away, leaving the Henderson family to finally deservedly face the cacophonous music of their own destructive making, I felt a quiet, profound sense of peace, a peace I hadn't felt in years, if ever, settle over me. Grandma June's legacy, I finally understood, wasn't just a little house by the sea. It was the enduring strength to fight for what was right, the unwavering courage to face down bullies and manipulators, no matter who they were, and the hard-won resilience to build a life, and perhaps, eventually, a true family, entirely on my own terms. The discordant, threatening notes of the past were finally fading, replaced by the tentative, hopeful, and surprisingly beautiful strains of a new and much more honest rhapsody.